In 1996, I did a wonderful bicycle trip. I took a sabbatical from work, about 8 weeks. Took my bicycle, which I hand built, and I flew it to France. And for 6 weeks, I camped. I had panniers and saddlebags, and I would put my bicycle on the train, be it the Express TGV or the local milk run trains. I had a Europass, and I would go from one corner of the country to the other. I did nothing but France for 6 weeks, and it was absolutely wonderful. And I camped most of the times. I think I only stayed in one hotel, and that was in Paris when I got there for just one night, and then on the bike. And some of the most memorable parts of that trip was this one particular town and one particular little cafe that I'll never forget. There was the Café Le Bear, and I looked it up. The proper name is Villa de Bear Café. And if you're looking at a map of France, if you have Marseille up here at the top, just go counterclockwise and come to Montpellier, and then Narbonne, Perpignan, and it's not far from Perpignan, so you're very, very close to the Spanish-Catalan border. And if you want to look at roughly where it was, it's right down there, and the Spanish border is right here. So it was this beautiful little cafe. And I would ride the train back and forth, crisscross the country, camp for 4 or 5 days, get tired, hop on the train at night, sleep on the couche cars, and then wake up the next morning on the other side of the country and start all over. And after a particularly wonderful and grueling journey, a leg, I got very tired, and I knew this area. I read the Michelin book, and it said this area was very unique because the Catalan people have their own language, have their own flag, own culture, and even though some of them are in the French territory and some in the Spanish territory, they consider themselves a very separate people, and they're very proud of that. And there's a lot of history there, and in particular, there was this one monastery, destroyed old monastery, that was known for making wines for years and years, and it still had some Spanish monks up at the very top, and they made wine the old-fashioned, and it was a wonderful destination. It's right by the water, and it was a great place, and they had a campsite. Lots of these places had campsites, so that was a lot of fun. So I took the train. In fact, I was on the other side. I was on the Atlantic west coast of France, and I took the train from Saint-Malo. Went up there and caught a bunch of trains, and eventually ended up in Montpellier, and from Montpellier I rode my bike south to Narbonne, and then to Perpignan. And from Perpignan, a wonderful little town called Argelès. And Argelès sell something. It doesn't show up on the map, but it's there. And a wonderful little place, and that's where Café Le Bear was. It's a tiny little place. Here's a little picture of it. It's your just quintessential little cafe, quiet, and it was right across the most important part, which was the train station, the local train station, and easy for me, I was getting off. So I make my way there, and I actually got off a little further up than that, but I rode down. It took a day to ride down there, and I finally get to Argelès and come upon Café Bear. And I sit down, and it was late in the afternoon, early evening. It was about 9:15, and being summer, it's still lots of light. And one of the most visual images I have is a mountaintop that was stunningly red. It was on fire. I will never forget, the whole mountain had caught on fire. Natural wildfires, that area is very dry, and it catches on fire. And to have seen an entire mountain aflame, and it was a hot fire. You can just tell by the glow, the red, and you can see the flames all throughout the mountain. And at the very top was the monastery. So that was a very surreal image in my head. And the other surreal images, as in Café Le Bear, were all these firemen, French firemen, beautiful uniforms, black slacks, white shirts, epaulets, and these amazing red pumper trucks, very high-end Mercedes-Benz, very, very heavy gearing, designed for any kind of fire, on or off-road. I mean, it was amazing hardware. Idle, just totally cold. And all the firemen were at Café Le Bear, drinking espresso, wine, smoking the cigarette. And there were like a dozen of them there. Nicest guys. So I wheeled my bicycle and plop it over there and sit at one of the tables, just watching this amazing fire consume the mountain. The whole mountain was ablaze. And after about an hour, I started chit-chat with the officer. He had a white shirt with lots of little gold epaulets. Figured he would know. And I said to him, pardon, excusez-moi, do you speak English? And he said, oui. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, isn't there a famous old monastery, either Spanish or Italian monastery up there, on top of that burning mountain? Oui. And I said, aren't they renowned for some of the finest wines in the world? And he says, oui. Mm-hmm. And I said, are the monks still up there? And he said, oui. Drinking his espresso and smoking cigarettes, calm and as comfortable as could be. And I said, so the monks are still up there? And he looked at me with this disdain and a tired and apoplectic look on him. You know, it looked like he hadn't had a bowel movement in 3 days. And then he said, these monks, you know, he's waving with a cigarette, these monks, they do not want to be rescued. They never leave the monastery. They pray for divine protection. We send a helicopter. Said, you want to come off the mountain? And they said, no, God will save us. The fireman, being true French, said, you want to burn? Burn. Down the helicopter and landed back in town, sat at the Café Bear. They were there for 2 days, and it turned from a rescue mission to a retrieval. It was just a matter of time until all the corpses were burned up there with all that fine wine, and they'd have, and once the flames ember off, they'd go and retrieve the bodies. And they were very casual about it, and I thought it was fascinating. So I said, oh, okay, I understand. Thank you. And I remember talking to several other people, and there was this wonderful Canadian, Canuck as he called himself. His name was Ron, and he was sitting next door. And he was a giant of a man. He was 6'8", 6'9", like 280, 90 pounds. He was a lumberjack. I don't care what his DNA or title said. He was a lumberjack, just a massive human being. Gentle giant, one of the kindest souls I've ever met in my life. And he pulls up a chair and talked in that wonderful French-Canadian accent. And he's like, "Quite a fire, eh?" And I said, "Yeah, it's interesting, talking to the fire guys." Yeah, the monks are going to burn. Their wine is supposed to be some of the finest in the world. And I said, "Yeah, that's what I read in the Michelin Guide." Back then I was able to drink wine, so I really wanted to sample it. It was sort of comedic and surreal. The weather was absolutely pleasant. There was a wonderful warm breeze coming from the sea up. And this tiny little village is right there in the water, so the breeze just wafted through and up the mountain and fed the flames of that fire, going straight up. And I rarely ate at the cafes. It was too expensive. But I had some salami and some pate and some saucisson and some fruit, apricots. They were in season, and I bought some from an orchard owner. And I sat there and I shared my meal with Ron, and we had discussed, and he loved his wine. He had bought a bottle of wine, not the one from the monastery, but a local fine table wine from France, local. And we were discussing the merits and the history and so forth. And he had been walking through Europe. He walked across Europe, and it was taking him a year. And he was heading up north, not just Europe, North Africa. He was an amazing adventurer, strong, kind. And this is, of course, before the digital age, right? So he had this little camera, not a fancy camera, but a good one, very small. I think it was a Rolleiflex, just small one, and took some nice pictures. And he developed them as he went along, and he kept them. Those were his prized possession. And he kept a journal, beautiful journal. And he had this massive blue backpack, just this absolute massive blue backpack. Had everything in it. And him and his big feet, he had like these Frankenstein feet with these Frankenstein boots. Just utterly amazing. And that's how he walked through North Africa and Europe and all over. Just an amazing experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then it was getting late. It was around 11:30, and I decided to turn in. And Ron said, "Well, there's the campground. That's where I'm staying. It's just 2 feet by the train station." And I said, "Oh, perfect." So gathered my bike. I did purchase, not a meal, but I purchased my favorite, which was French sorbet. I was given for that. And the nice girl gave me a nice bottle of water and a wonderful bowl of sorbet. Oh, you know, when you're hot and dry and you're riding all day. So Ron and I are walking the bicycle toward the campsite. 10 minutes walk, if that. Nice, clean, these were all hiker campsites and cyclists. Not too many automobiles, if any. It's very quiet, and you had toilets and showers and a bicycle repair shop. It was just wonderful. Just perfectly made for many folks who are doing what I did. It's just a wonderful tradition. And we sit around, and he pitched his tent, big blue tent, of course, next to his big, massive blue backpack. And we met this very interesting couple, and they were right next to us, and we had a little campfire there. And he was a South African heroin merchant. And how did she describe herself? She was this cute little blonde girl, not baby boomer, trust fund baby. That's the term she used. She was a trust fund baby. So these are teenagers who have outgrown their 18th birthday, so they're not, well, they're emancipated as adults, but they're not quite old enough to retain ownership and residuals of the trust funds from very powerful, rich families. So they were in no man's land for about 2-3 years. And many of them during this time explore, and they travel the world cheaply because they're cash poor. They're millionaires on paper, but they can't touch any of those millions until their 21st birthday. And that's what, at least in France, that was the law. And I think in many other European countries too. So they were just hanging out, and this young couple, the South African, he was just a nobody, but the young girl, she was a trust fund baby. And they had come from Morocco on a heroin binge. They decided to go off the grid and partake in a narcotic for a year or so. Not for everybody. That's something she wanted to do somehow. I don't know how the South African scumbag hooked up to her, but he did. Latched onto her. I don't know. He was ugly, he was skinny, he stunk, he didn't bathe often. And interestingly, he was barefooted. I mean, you live that lifestyle, and that's how you look. Hit a small bedroll with rope on it, and it's all he needed. There's something to be said about that too, but it's mostly bad. It's not good. Well, anyway, we talked a great deal about what was important to them, what was important to us, to my friend Ron and so forth, and how we made a living. I was curious. And I was particularly interested in the South African. And he sold mostly heroin, some of these trinkets and jewelry handmade from hemp and other knickknacks they sell for a few liras here and there. And just trash. Just something to put in your mouth. And I asked the girl how she described being a trust fund baby. She had no money, whatever she was able to take from home, she sold and got a couple $100 for it, and then that lasted a week or two, and then the rest she had to hustle. And the South African guy would pimp her out, and came down to brass tacks. And the South African was saying to Ron, he said, "Well, you're a gigantic man. You must have gigantic urges. How would you like to have your way with this pretty girl?" He said she was a virgin. And I remember stopping him and asking the South African if he had any qualms at all about prostituting this young lady that he met just months ago, from the moral, ethical point of view. None. And I asked the girl, I said, is this something you choose to do in your own will? She said, I don't care. That kind of attitude. And I didn't judge. I wasn't judging. I was just curious. You know, you have other options. You can be a waiter, a janitor, or whatever, haul trash. You don't have to sell your body. But it wasn't for me to judge. I was just there to learn from their experiences and their perspective. That's the beauty of travel. That's why I was doing what I was doing. And she said she didn't give it much thought and it didn't mean anything. It's just chalk it off to experience. And my buddy Ron, he was tired and hadn't gotten laid in a while, so he just grabbed the girl and off they went in their tent, and it didn't take him long, and before you know it, he was asleep, and the girl was able to get him to pay her, I don't know, 20 francs or something. It's just nominal amount, nothing. So, and Ron was sleeping in his tent. It was a small blue tent, and he was a giant of a man, so his feet stuck out from the tent. And it was cool. It wasn't cold. It was cool. Beautiful night, stars. And his massive Frankenstein-like boots next to the tent. And the heroin merchant and the little girl and I, we continued our discussion for another hour. And we talked a great deal about politics and history and what life for them was like and what they encountered. And it was interesting. Nothing bizarre or extremely unusual. It was just interesting. And vice versa, they enjoyed some of my travels. When you ride on a bicycle and you tour in that way, you see things from a different perspective. And that's not something that was interesting to them. So they wanted to hear that and get my perspective, and gladly share that with them. And it was around 11:30, midnight. I was tired and thanked them all. And one of the things I learned was I had a spool of small piano wire. And at the time, the Japanese and the French were in a bitter trade war all over French sake. Don't laugh. The French know wine. If anybody knows wine, the French do. And they decided, well, why don't we, the French, try and make rice wine? Why should we leave it to the purveyors of the Japanese? Why not? They know wine. So this trade war, the Japanese were incensed and so forth. And the end result of that trade war was the Japanese were probably the number one major manufacturer of bicycle components, Shimano and things like that, that were relatively inexpensive but well made. Not like the fancy Italian Campanelle or some of the handmade Italian gearings. You wanted to ride a bike and you were going for endurance and long distance, you got yourself some Shimano gearing, and those suckers would work for a long time. And when I went on my trip, I had taken 2 or 3 extra sets of everything because I knew they would break down. And they did. So it made my bicycle very valuable for thieves. So I had learned to snake this piano wire throughout my bicycle, in a very thin piano wire. And I would loop the piano wire in my toe. And that stuck out from my tent. And if somebody tried to steal my bicycle, which they tried many times, because again, it was quite valuable for the components. And it was a unique bike. It was a mountain hybrid. And it was a mountain bike that I converted to a road bike. Suspension and so forth. There's a lot of money in it. And I did it for comfort. But of course, that spells money for the local thieves. So again, and I had chains and locks on it and so forth. But piano wire worked real well. So I put the piano wire in my toe. They thought it was a riot, saw the value of it. And everyone went to sleep. No problemo. Slept so well, so comfortably. Never woke up from the piano wire. And wake up to the roosters crowing. It was beautiful. Just, southern France, Mediterranean. And all of a sudden, I hear this shout from my buddy Ron, who had started to scream because his belongings, his boots, his Frankenstein boots, and this massive blue backpack, which was inside his tent, gone. This must have been around 6:30, close to 7 a.m. I mean, I really slept well and long. And of course, the heroin merchant and the pretty little blonde girl, gone. And if you remember, the train station, was literally a 10-minute walk. And that's what happened to Ron's stuff. He was so angry and apoplectic because more than anything else, it was his photographs and his journal that could not be replaced. That was precious. And it was a chronology of all the wonderful people he had met. And he had taken my picture and all the countless of other pictures, and he wanted to make a little book for himself, not to publish, but just for his own recollection. He was so upset. So I said to him, well, my friend, maybe we could do something for you. And I had a pair of flip-flops that I packed in my gear that I would use on the rocky stones on the coast. And the coast of that part of the Mediterranean is all little pebbles. So I had a pair of flip-flops, which were terribly small on Ron, but they were better than none, and he gladly put them on. And we walked to the train station, 10 minutes away, right there. And there was a wonderful representative of the French National Transit System, SCNF, I think, some acronym like that. And you could buy your tickets. It was a tiny little station, local. And I asked him if he spoke English, and he said yes. And I said, we have a slight predicament. And we're looking for these people who took my friend's boots and his belongings. and this train guy in his little uniform asked Ron if he was born yesterday, and didn't ridicule him, but came close. And that acerbic man-to-man, dude, you should have known. But nevertheless, he wasn't really rude. He was just humored, just another repeat of the same human behavior he's seen 1,000 million times. And I said, well, could you help us? And I said, perhaps we could have a little assistance here. And he was very helpful, and he said, oh, of course, glad to help you. And he said, we in France have a very extensive rail system, and each train has a post car. It's a yellow car, and in it, Le Poste is being hauled. That's how the French move a lot of their mail on the train. They also move money and other things in the train. Hence, every postcar has a gendarme, which is a paramilitary, sort of a national police force officer, always stationed at every one of those. And they're quite extensive. Wonderful people, and the French are very high-tech. And the guy calls up the train, and he showed us all the map and the schedules of all the trains, and there were several milk runs. And again, we were so close to the Spanish border that there were virtually maybe one or two stops, but nobody went south. Everyone went north. All of them. And there were the milk runs, and there were the one or two express trains. The express trains were in Montpellier, up further north. So they're all local milk runs. And quickly, the train guy said, well, they're probably going up north, and whatever. And he said, what time do you think they boarded the train? And there was like a train at 6:15, 6:30, 7 something. So we guesstimated, and he said, oh, well, if he took this train, then Francois, whoever the gendarme was on the train, may have seen him. So calls him up, gets the gendarme on that particular local train that went all the way to Montpellier. And sure enough, the gendarme remembered. Yes, this very petite woman with the yellow hair, with the massive blue backpack. She was carrying the fully loaded backpack. And the scrawny guy was walking in these huge boots. It was a comical sight. And it stuck in the gendarme's head. They boarded the train. He remembered them. And the fare was very, very little. A couple of francs to go up there. And the gendarme wanted to talk to me, and I said, hey, could we have a little professional courtesy? I carried a badge at the time, not with me on the trip, but professionally back home. And I said, could we have a little professional courtesy? Could you help us out here? My friend really is in distress. It's the personal mementos to him that are meaningful. And the gendarme said, well, not only that, but the insult of it. And he meant it, to him. A part of being that French persona was the insult. How could you steal a man's boots? Okay, you steal money from his wallet, you steal a coat maybe, but a man's boots? Especially a man who's walking in his adventure. Mm-mm. And the gendarme said, well, why don't we just invite them to come and sit with you? And I said, oh, you could do that? And I'm thinking like an American. And he said, oui, of course. And he said, well, we're coming up here, and we'll just hop off on the next stop, and I should see you in maybe 2 hours or so. And I said, oh, terrific. I said, do you know Café Le Bear right by the train station? And he says, of course I do. Sort of a silly question. Do I know? Everybody knows Café Le Bear. This tiny little place. And I said, well, great. And Ron and I were very thankful to the train clerk there, the station, and we went back to Café Le Bear and decided to have some breakfast. And I had plenty of food with me. You never get tired of apricots and cheese and salami and pate. I could eat it 10 times a day, and I did. It was so good. I mean, just homemade French cuisine at its best. And the morning whittled away, and by then everyone in the cafe knew what had gone. And there are no secrets in this tiny little town. And everyone was laughing with Ron. And he was a good spirit. He was laughing at himself. And we were all sure all his possessions were gone and thrown. But it was an experience, something he would remember. And even the cute little girl who favored me with a sorbet. There's nothing like sorbet for breakfast. Oh. And I insisted on paying. After a while, time went by and the train arrived. The southbound train. The local run. And sure enough, you look down and there's the yellow La Poste car. And there was a gendarme in his paramilitary uniform, and he was a soldier. 2 meters tall, fit, black polished boots, pistol, radio, crisp uniform. It was very dusty there, but he was spotless. And he had a baton, a walnut stick, polished. Everything about his uniform was just mint perfect. Looked like he just rolled out of the showroom, just perfect. And there was the little blonde girl with the backpack, like Quasimodo, walking. And there was the heroin merchant, looked identical, smelled the same. Clop, 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 clop. With the Frankenstein boots, which were obviously just insanely large for him, but that's what he was wearing. And we come up, and the gendarme looks at my friend Ron, who was in purple. Just because he was a gentle giant didn't mean that he didn't know how to beat someone. They're not all peaceniks up in Canada. And the gendarme gracefully motioned Ron to hold his peace. And I understood it. The French have a long history of an egalitarian system of laws and justice. And when you're in their country, you must submit to their procedures, which are long established and codified in law and principles. People of the French Revolution, justice and all that. And once Ron kind of settled back and I was holding this gentle giant, come on, just chill, just relax. The gendarme, polite as could be, with his hand back, talking to the heroin merchant. And he said to the young girl, he nodded and he said, put the backpack on the ground and take out everything and lay it out neatly on the ground. She was quite compliant. And everyone was relieved. By then, all the waitresses from Le Bear Cafe and some other people, by the way, the firefighters were still there drinking their morning espresso. They didn't care. But all the other people who kind of sucked into this little drama were looking around. And a huge cheer came out when we saw that his journal was there and his packet of photographs, his black and white photographs that he had rubber banded. It was several hundred photographs of all his travels. They were there. They were safe. And he was so happy. And the gendarme was looking at the stuff, again, hand behind the back, looking at the stuff on the ground, and turned to the heroin merchant and he said, is there anything else missing? No. And he was rude. He had an attitude. He smelled bad. He's just a low-level person. And the gendarme, still with his hand behind his back, politely said, are you sure? Things like money, wallet? And then Ron started to think, and his wallet and his passport. And then the South African went, now, with an attitude. Out of nowhere. It was like a Jackie Chan movie. This gendarme had whipped out his baton. And he hit the South African here with a thud. I was shocked how fast he could get that stick out, how good he was with it. And it was solid walnut, birch, oak, it was a dense piece of wood. And everybody heard the skull take that pound. Blood everywhere, just guy buckled to his knees. Blood spewing from his mouth. Pulled out money from parts of the boots. He pulled out everything he had. That was the beginning salvo of the beating, and he certainly didn't want to get any more. And everybody was clear to them he was going to get a lot more until everything was accounted for. And all the money, none of it was missing. He had maybe 250 some francs. This is before the euro. And his wallet didn't have credit cards per se, but it had his passport, a Canadian passport. And that came out. He had hid it somewhere in an innocuous place. I can't remember, but he volunteered it. And the heroin merchant was on his hands and knees on the dirt, blood dripping on the dirt. And I was looking at the little blonde girl, and she was matter of fact. And the gendarme asked Ron to take another look, make sure everything was there. And it was. Everything was there. And but then the boots had come off. And Ron gladly, he had socks in his hand, took my floppies off, put on his socks, put on his boots. And then the gendarme said to the couple, said, leave. And I was a little perplexed. I'm from the United States of America. We prosecute everyone, put people in prison. And I said to him, aren't you going to charge him with a crime? And the gendarme looked at me and he said, you Americans just fill your prisons with people. You're very unsafe. And I said, well, you're not too particularly safe here either. And he says, yeah, but the prisons are not full and we're not paying for it. It was a funny exchange. And I said, well, can we buy you a drink or a glass of wine? And he said, of course. And he sat down, and the heroin merchant, the little blonde girl, picked up their little rag satchels, and off they went, waiting for the next train to go up. And there were the firefighters. And all of us went from the theft issue to the fire, and the mountain was glowing. It burned all night, still on fire. And one thing that was different from the night before was, I think they were Italian monks. The Italian government had sent a bunch of seaplanes that were specifically designed for fighting forest fires in Italy. And I think the French were quite content to let the monks burn. But not the Italians. They're people. So these seaplanes, and there were at least half a dozen of them, they were giant, they were yellow, and they would scoop down into the sea and scoop up a couple of metric tons of seawater. Pull up, 4 props, huge. And they'd go in like bees. They would swirl around the cupola of the monastery and spray it with water. And they did that for the next 72 hours nonstop. I watched them. I mean, I was tired. I was just enjoying life, and I was watching this event unfold. And after 72 hours of constant dropping, the fire at the top, of course, it looked like the whole mountain was black. What was green, then red, now was just cinder, char black. Was just smoldering. And so by the third day, I decided to ride my bike up there. Hey, the monastery was saved. That wine was up there. And I asked a friendly firefighter, still there, still sitting there in a crisp white uniform next to the red pumper trucks. And I said, is the fire finished? And he goes, I said, okay. So, I mean, why not? So, got the bike ready and rode up this mountain up to halfway. It was a windy, everything was charred, everything was black. And there was no breeze. It was really hot. And I had a roll of t-shirts. That was my bedroll. And I rolled them all up. And so it was just hot, and I'd occasionally pour some water on myself to cool off. And I noticed that it was getting hotter and hotter, and I was only halfway. Remember, my bicycle had 100 pounds extra of supplies and gear. And I had 32 gears, but still, it was a lot harder than it should have been. And I was halfway, and I was starting to get very hot. And I turned around, and the mountain had reignited. And I said, holy. And of course, then the breeze kicked in from the sea, run right up the mountain. And everything was charred black. It can't burn anymore. It's been burning for days. It's gone. It's all cinder. Wrong. Reignited, flamed. Oh boy. So I quickly realized, oh, I'm in trouble. So I turned the bike around, and I had halfway up down the mountain to go, burning mountain. So I took one of my t-shirts and I soaked it with what water I had, poured the rest in my head, and then I punched 2 holes for my eyes, and I took my helmet off and I inverted and forced it onto my face like this. And it had 2 vents up there that slots I could see through. And then I took my Gore-Tex foul weather gear and put it up like a hospital smock, just to shield me. Down I went. And the heat got so quick, so fast, that I remember feeling on the throat here, the burning rubber from my tires, spraying on my neck, burning it here. And I went through the flames. I had exhaled. I knew better, so I had exhaled when I hit the flames. I closed my eyes, and I remember squeezing my brakes, and they had melted, gone. And the bike became unstable if I went faster than, say, 22, 23 miles an hour. I had a little computer. Still worked in the heat. But squeezed the brakes, and they were gone. They weren't disc brakes like good bikes have today. There was just rubber calipers. I shot through the flames. The bicycle was unbelievably unstable. I was bucking it to finally get it to hold place, and amazingly, I poof, made it by the flames. Seemed like an eternity, but it was maybe half a minute, if that. And crashed. I came down the mountain and then crashed into a car. And my buddy Ron, who was sitting there, casually walked over to me, picked me up like a sack of potatoes, dragged my bike with his other arm, dragged me back to Cafe Bear. I wasn't particularly hurt. Amazingly, I wasn't burned. I had gloves, so what burns I had were here, but they were superficial. I had bicycle summer gloves, vented, but they were leather pads, so I didn't burn my hands, my palms. And my bike was destroyed, which was, it was okay. I rebuilt it right there. So I spent about a week at the La Bear camp, and I have fond memories. I Googled it, and here the street image of the train station. It's still there. And here's the image of the exact same place that I sat. I remember. And the pictures are the same. They haven't changed them. Years ago. A wonderful place. Part of the wonderful memories that I'll always keep with me. And why I love my bicycle so much and hope to once again go another bike trip like that, but maybe this time with an electric motor.